Hey guys. So, all right, we're on. Outstanding. All right, let's see. Gonna still got some of that Japanese whiskey and some Ardbeg, but I think it feels like a Talisker day, so gonna go with that. Hey Patrick, what's going on? So let's see. There we go. So I am working on a follow-up right now to the article that I had in Jacobin right after the election. It's called "No Honeymoon for Joe Biden," and the basic claim. Someone in chat says they had a Charlie Kirk ad before they got in, which is, hey. I'm not going to object to Charlie Kirk's money being wasted. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I saw that. Definitely going to get to that. So anyway, so I had this article right after the election was finally called, on the Saturday after Election Day, called "No Honeymoon for Joe Biden," arguing that the left shouldn't give sorry, chat's cracking me up. The left shouldn't give any sort of credit to Biden for good intentions, or it shouldn't adopt a kind of wait and see attitude. It certainly shouldn't operate on the belief that Biden can be dramatically pushed left, and that he'll, as Bernie Sanders, who I obviously love, but I think is very mistaken, said could be the best president since FDR. Right? That's not going to happen, I think. And it seems pretty straightforward that that's not going to happen. There seems to be like a lot of like really obvious evidence for that claim. All right. I feel like I should say the stuff, after I do that like Lionel Hutz says after he has a swig from his flask. But anyway, none of that applies. So yeah, that the evidence for that seems pretty straightforward to me. So first, hey, this is the jacket that I was, I've actually gotten a little bit out of the habit lately, but like if you watch any of the old, TMBS segments that I did in person, or the debunks after they finally got the upgraded the studio so you could do the video link. I was always wearing this thing. So, yeah, look, Bernie might not really think that, but I guess I think it's a dubious strategy, right, on his part, to create that expectation, right? Like, because for one thing, I think there's a good, that like when it doesn't happen, rather than people saying, appreciate that, Boxy. Actually, that's awesome. So if you, if you say that Biden's going to be the most progressive president since the FDR, or even that he could be the most progressive president since FDR, at least if you don't really like make it clear that what you're saying is not that he will be, but that he could be if he does X, Y, and Z. If you're saying he could be if he does X, Y, and Z, I have no objection to that. I think that's probably good, right? Like that's, like that's a correct thing to point out, that like, even with the excuse of a Republican Senate, there are a lot of things that he could be doing that he's not going to be doing, and that's worth kind of keeping track of. But I think if you say that he will be, or you say could in a way that makes it sound to people like what you're saying is that he will be, that I think could be a real mistake, because that could really like, blow up in his face next time when he's saying, hey, we need to vote for Kamala Harris to stop, God knows, Josh Hawley, Tucker Carlson, one of Mike Huckabee's fail sons, whoever is running for president, in 2024. Yeah, right. I mean, like that anybody could be, right? That doesn't really mean that much by itself. then like I think people are going to say, well, hold on, no, Bernie, you cry wolf. You said that Joe Biden, like that there was a reasonable chance that he would like do these amazing progressive things that, yeah, I quoted Mussolini exactly. That would actually be pretty funny. The Mussolini clone who'd be raised in the United States and given some like Republican talking points. But so I think it's a mistake to say that, right? Like, even if he doesn't believe it, I think strategically it's dubious to put that out there right now. Yeah. Thank you so much, Torches and Pitchforks, for the super chat. Says, hope you all saw Eric Osgood, MD, on the TMBS Patron Post show. That was last night, right? Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I saw that it existed. I have the email in my inbox telling me about it. But the thing is, I thought even when I wrote the article, which was obviously before the election was called for Biden. I didn't just like really, really quickly write it because I think they had that thing up on the website like half an hour after the election was called. It's not like I thought. Even then, it seemed to me there were very good reasons to think that Biden wasn't going to do any of that. And to be clear, I always thought that, right? Like, I thought that it was worth voting for Biden in swing states because I think the difference between a thoroughly mediocre centrist Democratic administration and an aggressive right-wing Republican one is significant in some ways. But I never thought that Biden was going to govern in some way that reflected like the recommendations of those Biden-Bernie task forces. That like I never thought that. I just thought it was a question of like pick the enemy that you'd rather fight with. That's true. Actually, Mussolini not only used to be a socialist, I think he started as a anarcho-syndicalist at the very beginning of his political career, although I might be getting the steps mixed up there. But he certainly was an anarcho-socialist syndicalist at one point. And then my understanding is that he was kind of in a wing of the anarcho-syndicalist movement that supported the Italian war effort, which is really weird. And then things drifted off in a bizarro right-wing direction after that. But look, if you look at Biden's career, his decades in the Senate and his 8 years at vice president, I don't think there's a lot in there that is indicative of like real left-wing policy preferences, to put it mildly. Like he spent decades as one of the loudest advocates for locking up more people, this like real super tough on crime position within the Democratic Party. He was one of the loudest voices for invading Iraq in the Democratic Party in 2002, 2003. Bankruptcy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, you could say, well, maybe he had a road to Damascus kind of conversion moment at some point between now and then. But like, when was that? Right? When did that happen? Spinoza Logos, thank you so much for the super chat. Really appreciate it, brother. Says all things excellent are difficult as they are rare. Yeah, well, sure, fair enough. but yeah. Yeah, Mussolini, to be clear, was the one who started out as an anarcho-syndicalist in Italy. But you could say he had some sort of road to Damascus conversion moment, but then like, when would that have been? Right? Certainly not, certainly must have happened at some point after he famously told a room full of donors that nothing fundamental would change in his presidency. Certainly would have happened at some point after like mid-September, when he was bragging, I beat the socialist, or at the very least after like March or April, when he said he'd veto Medicare for all. And I know these things are technically compatible with the platform that's on his campaign website, because he'd just do a public option, not Medicare for all, just do 2 years of community college for free instead of 4 years of college for free, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, they're certainly not good signs. And then there are people who say, he'll just go with the flow. Okay, sorry about that, guys. People say he's just a chameleon. He'll just go with the flow. But the thing is there are two issues there. One, this is a decades-long record. We shouldn't be too quick to dismiss the idea that the way he consistently acted for decades tells you something about what his genuine policy preferences are. The second is that the flow is not really in our direction, or at least not nearly as much in our direction as people who talk this way make it sound like. Because remember, right? I mean, the left has really been resurgent for the last few years compared to where it was before that. And certainly the public, particularly the Democratic base, has shifted. Hey, John, pretty far to the left, on at least, like not universally or in an uncomplicated way, but the public is very sympathetic to Bernie Sanders kinds of economic programs. But the Democratic Party as an institution isn't flowing left. I mean, it can look like that if you spend all your time, reading articles about, AOC sniping back and forth with Nancy Pelosi and whatever. But remember, even with Cory Bush, the Democratic Socialist Caucus, so to speak, in the House and Senate put together is still like, that's still a caucus you can count on one hand. So all of which is just to say, not that there aren't like gray area congressmen who, aren't quite, where the squad is politically, but they're better than a lot, they're better than normal Democrats. All that stuff is true. But the point is just that the idea that the Democratic Party institutionally has really shifted left is wildly overstated. So anyway, so I wrote this article, that was published right after the election saying, hey, Biden absolutely cannot be counted on to do any of the good stuff that he says in the campaign website. Because, for all the reasons I just mentioned, because we can just look back at the record of the Obama administration that also came into office promising card check and a public option. None of that happened. Very similar situation even, because they'll have the plausible deniability most likely of a GOP-controlled Senate. So I think that we need, we need to really immediately start emphasizing opposition to the left from Biden, right? I mean, we can argue about how much good that'll do, but at the very least, why give him a break in that regard, right? Like why give him let's be patient and see what he does. Maybe he won't be so bad. Fuck that, right? You should immediately operate on the assumption that that the Biden administration is not our friend, and is going to govern, the way that Obama did, right? Remember, Obama came to power. He was saying, like I just said, card check, public option. He was saying, Biden's platform is better, but look at what was in it, right? Card check, public option, ending habeas corpus, and restoring habeas corpus, and closing Guantanamo Bay, protecting whistleblowers, and then look at how Obama actually governed. He presided over an 8-year expansion of the gap between the rich and poor at home. By Tom Daschle's account, gave up, the public option in the first minute of negotiations with insurance companies and pharmaceuticals. Made no serious push for card check, and greatly expanded the drone war. Regime changed Libya, pursued Edward Snowden around the world. I think that's what we have to expect. I would love to be wrong about this, of course. I would love to spend the next 4 years arguing with liberals about whether Biden's newly enacted public option was good enough or we need to keep pushing for Medicare for all. That would be fantastic. I just don't think it's going to happen. That's the point of the article. And of course, a lot of liberals freaked out when they read this. There were some pretty epic reactions from blue tick liberals on Twitter. And there was a Financial Review columnist who referred to me as a member of the lunatic left in a column for saying all of this. So the follow-up I'm working on now is, yes, you should read those two books. Oh my God, yeah, Reducing Nuclear Stockpiles. So the follow-up article is basically sort of noting the unhinged reaction from centrist liberals who could not believe that we at Jacobin were such ridiculous nitpickers that we would, that we wouldn't just celebrate this victory, that we'd say these bad things about Biden, with Trump not even gone yet. Yeah, well, lib's got a lib. Sorry, just reading the chat. We should talk about the Obama stuff, by the way, because some of that's pretty funny. The Obama stuff in the book and the interviews that he's given about the book. So anyway, the follow-up is just kind of noting that reaction from a lot of blue checkmark libs and saying, like, guys, check it out. Look at everything we know so far about Biden's cabinet. And this is really powerfully confirming the point. This is not the team that you would be assembling if you were getting ready for a major push for card check and a public option, to put it mildly. Yeah. So one of the funnier things, apparently, in the screenshots I've seen, I obviously haven't read the thing yet. But yeah, that's a good question. If the wall and kids in cages motivated voters, will Biden tear down the wall and get rid of the cages? Well, the thing is, there really is no wall to tear down. That all Trump really did, he didn't really build almost anything, as far as I know, in terms of new border fence construction. What little money went to that, during the Trump administration, just went to repairing portions of border fence in areas that were already fenced. So really, honestly, if you were part of the right-wing xenophobic base, you should be mad at him for not following through on that. But of course, Biden's not going to take any of that down. I absolutely don't think that's going to happen. As far as cages go, so there are two issues when you talk about kids in cages. One is the cages part, and the other is the kids part, the family separation. My understanding is that is that the Trump administration did back off the family separation policy. Like, the big issue there is that there are parents who, while they were separated, were bullied by ICE or the Border Patrol into signing voluntary deportation orders. So they were already gone, and now they can't reunite with their kids, or their kids who they now say they just can't track down their parents. I think that's more the issue, right? Rather than the policy itself continuing. But as far as the cages part, look, I mean, there were cages under Obama. There are a lot of cages under Obama. The Trump innovation wasn't building concentration camps for undocumented immigrants. Those already existed. The Trump innovation was expanding them and separately detaining, the parents and the children. That's that's my understanding, at least. That was Trump's special, ugly little innovation. But again, I don't expect Biden is going to do much of anything on immigration. I'd be very surprised if he did. Let's put it that way. So yeah, the cages, in a literal sense, it might have been his innovation. Just in that, they were building a lot of quick ad hoc ones, but there were certainly, detention camps, under the Obama administration. Immigrants' rights groups were very mad at him for a lot of very good reasons. Speaking of Obama, though, on a much funnier note, the pages that I've seen people post from, actually, let me get you guys the exact quote. Make sure I'm saying this right. So saw this last night. So in his book, there is this amazing passage where he says, can I find it? No, because I'm looking in the wrong place. Okay. So he's talking about his college years. Here we go. Yes, here we go. Here's the quote. So it is, I'm not going to try to read this in an Obama voice. I can't do the Obama voice. Looking back, it's embarrassing to recognize the degree to which my intellectual curiosity, those first 2 years of college, paralleled the interests of various women I was attempting to get to know. Wait for it. Marx and Marcuse, so I had something to say to the long-legged socialist who lived in my dorm. Fanon and Gwendolyn Brooks for the smooth-skinned sociology major who never gave me a second look. Foucault and Wolff for the ethereal bisexual who wore mostly black. As a strategy for picking up girls, my pseudo-intellectualism proved mostly worthless. I found myself in a series of affectionate but chaste relationships. So there you go. Yes, that's from Barack Obama's new book. Yes, Theory Incel Obama. That is Barack Obama talking ruefully about, and whatever. I mean, it's obviously he's recounting this and now he thinks it was dumb, right? But yeah, it's pretty long. I think it's like 700 pages. Yeah, maybe Michelle ruined him. Maybe if he'd, maybe if he had gotten together with the long-legged socialist, then we'd have a much better version of Obama now. But he said, what's it? Appreciate that. So yeah, I mean, I really I can almost imagine, if Michael were around to do this. I was saying this on Twitter last night. I can almost imagine Michael's impression of a young Obama trying the various Marx and Foucault based pickup lines, but that would be that would anyway, whatever. Yet another thing we're never going to get, but that's in any case though. That was very funny. I read the Marxist Obama, post-structuralist Obama, Fanon Obama, which actually Franz Fanon Obama. Never know if I'm saying that surname right. Anyway, I wonder if that could drift closer to. Obviously, it wouldn't be the same as Nation of Islam Obama, but there might be some overlap there. But I also read the New York Times review over the weekend. Socialist Obama. Read the New York Times review over over the weekend. Well, he's not, again, he's saying this, it's very funny, right? In many ways, it's very funny, but also this is a middle-aged dude recounting him being a dumbass when he was 19 or whatever. Wouldn't actually hold it against him, but oh my God, Maoist Obama, yeah, I love that. Kwame Nkrumah Obama. But in any case, right? Read the New York Times review of the book over the weekend, and my impression from that, right? Obviously, it's Eka and Erkan in the chat says Obama passed over a note to the smooth-skinned socialist reading white mass black pussy. Okay. Yeah, I think that's not quite it, but but we're getting close. Maoist Obama, let me be clear. If you like your landlord, you can keep them. Let me be clear. We need a protracted people's war from the mountains. Anyway. So, yeah, I don't know how much of Obama's later political development we could actually blame on Michelle, but it's a funny thing to say. So, look, it sounds like mostly just a very typical post-presidential memoir, right? George W. Bush had one of these. I think he actually called it Hard Choices. Hillary Clinton, not that she was ever the president, but after she was Secretary of State, she had two memoirs. The first one was before she was Secretary of State. It was called My Story or something like that. But then the second one after she was Secretary of State was called Decision Points. Because again, it's the same idea as George W. Bush calling his memoir like Hard Choices. The implication is that this is, I actually wouldn't be shocked if he had written it himself. Like, I mean, whatever. I mean, who knows? Obviously, it's any kind of speculated about somebody based on their public persona is always a little funny. But Matthew, I see the ethics question. I will respond. Remind me if I don't. But I think that I think, you never know, of course, like it's always a little silly to take a public figure and think you can really guess, these things. But Obama actually wouldn't be shocked if he did write it himself. Like that, I think that strikes me as something that he might do. He did write, I mean, presumably, I think that like Dreams from My Father, I think he actually wrote that. Like, I don't think there was a ghostwriter for that. I guess I'm not sure. Sorry, I got it wrong. Hillary's was Hard Choices. George W. Bush's was Decision Points. I had it the other way around, but you can see how, right? Because it's, variations within very tight parameters on the same theme. Yeah, well, actually, it is interesting that Dick Cheney is so far out of the public spotlight. Every other ghoul from the Bush administration has been rehabilitated as a resistance guy. I don't know why he didn't get in on it. But in any case, the point is that, these memoirs, Decision Points, Hard Choices, right, exactly, right. I'm sure that when Trump does it, probably will be Difficult Dilemmas or something like that. Or when Joe Biden does his, that'll be Difficult Dilemmas. They're all, the point of all of these memoirs is, if you don't like all of the decisions I made, that's just because you don't understand what it was like to be there in the room with these hard choices, these decision points where, it was so difficult to figure out what to do. Here's the information. And if you just understood all the factors I was weighing, you would have understood what I did. It's all just like self-exculpation. Because look, thank you so much, Matthew, for the super chat. Yeah, everything's going pretty well. Appreciate it, brother. That in Bush's case, of course, it was because, it's as hard as this is to remember now, that Bush and his administration have been so rehabilitated by liberals. When Bush was leaving office, I mean, he was like generally understood as having presided over this like almost unfathomable series of disasters. Iraq obviously is the big one. That's arguably the worst thing any president has done in several decades. Punched that hole in the Middle East that caused like all these like this kind of ascending ladder of chaos and bloodshed that we're still dealing with now. But Hurricane Katrina, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you, John. And so, obviously he's trying to rehabilitate himself. It's like, oh, what would you have done differently, right? Like that's the implication. And then I think with Hillary's book, Hard Choices, and with Obama's new book, I think it's like very revealing of this kind of like centrist, pseudo-technocratic worldview. Commander in shoes, that'd be good. Actually, maybe that'll be Trump's one. That sounds more like Trump. So yeah, no, I think the immigration reform did cause more of a backlash with his conservative base than people realized at the time. But I mean, Katrina was certainly a big part of what like really plummeted his second term approval numbers. The invisible hands. Yeah. So in any case, because with people like Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama, they've got this way of seeing the world, and this is not entirely insincere, right? I mean, I think this is really what they what they tell themselves, that politics isn't for these people really a matter of struggle, right? It's not a matter of of a struggle between clashing, economic interests. It's not even a matter of a struggle between clashing ideologies. It's a matter for them of just technical problem solving. That there are these problems, and people have various solutions. And if people have bad solutions, that's because they're not smart enough or because they're being blinded by ideology, which in the minds of the Clinton, Obama, Biden type people is the worst thing you can be, is ideological. And if you take all the ideological filters off and just see things as they are, then, this was the premise of Obama's grand bargain vision, that he spent years pursuing this idea of a grand bargain with Republicans on entitlement reform and the budget. And really the idea is we could just kind of if you get all the smartest people in the same room and they drop all the ideology stuff, then they'll just converge on the right technical solutions to these problems. But of course, even, the ideology, it burns. I guess that started out as a Zizek impression and sort of degenerated into Rainier Wolfcastle from The Simpsons. But in any case, the calling these problems, right? Thinking in those terms, problems, solutions, is itself profoundly ideological. Because really what that says, that really speaks to that worldview that I'm just talking about, right? In Give Them an Argument, the book, I compare this to, Leibniz saying that, in the future, once we do develop really good formal logic, philosophers won't have to dispute with each other anymore. They'll just say, let us sit down, they'll just sit down and say, let us calculate together, right? That's really this kind of bloodless technocratic worldview. And of course, the problem with that is that it fails basic Hume, which is to say that that the facts, right, just being really intelligent and having a really, being really good at reasoning and knowing all the relevant facts doesn't. Oh, is that a Carnap question? Okay, I missed that. So that just having all the relevant facts and being really good at reasoning is going to get you to the right political conclusions. But the problem with this is that there are lots of problems, right? As Harris seething. And I'm actually might do a bonus episode soon with my friends Mark and Warren. There's the two philosophy professors who are on the very late part of the election night live stream. So we were talking about just doing a bonus episode that would just be called Sam Harris is Wrong About Everything, and get into his goofy meta-ethics and his goofy free will book and, all this stuff, right? Okay. I missed the Carnap question, but I see it now. I'll remember to answer that. I think John Kerry might have won if Katrina had happened a year sooner. It's obviously it's hard to know, but that was a pretty close election. Lots of people at the time, back then, in fact, some of the very same things that have seen a new lease on life in the last couple of weeks as conservative conspiracy theories, back in 2004, beginning of 2005, were very popular liberal conspiracy theories, which I remember at the time, about how the voting machines, were confabulating thousands and thousands of fake votes or switching thousands and thousands of votes from Kerry to Bush, because they just couldn't fathom that John Kerry, with his inspiring political message and notoriously charismatic personality, didn't carry Ohio. Which is probably a little too flippant. I do think there are real concerns about the cybersecurity concerns about even doing electronic voting. But that's a different thing from saying that there's evidence of falsification in any particular election. And I've never been very persuaded. I think the circumstantial evidence was probably better then than it is now, but it still wasn't nearly as persuasive as a lot of partisans think it is. But even with the Swift vote and everything, Kerry still came very close to winning at least the electoral vote. I think it's entirely possible with Katrina he would have just barely, inched across the finish line unknowable, of course, but I think it's possible. As much of a loser as Carey was, he did come very close. Carnap and Russell were both socialists, actually. And I think there are some Carnappy insights that are actually helpful to leftist politics. But get back to that, right? What I was saying about Hume versus the centrists is that the problem with this non-ideological smart people coming up with the right technical solutions approach to politics, or one of the problems with it, it's not the only problem, but it's one of the most fundamental problem, is it actually was stolen from Al Gore. That was a very different situation. But one of the most fundamental problems is that there's no amount of being really, really good at reasoning and knowing all the relevant facts that's going to get you to the right political conclusions. And the very idea that it could is fundamentally confused for the simple reason that, and this is where the Hume stuff kicks in, that what reasoning can do, looking at all the relevant empirical non-moral facts and reasoning about them can do, is to help you figure out how to achieve the goals you care about. It can't tell you which goals to care about in the first place, and that's a really basic distinction. So look, if you have if you have libertarian political goals, then you can start looking at the facts and reasoning about the facts, try to figure out how to carry them out. If you have socialist political goals, you could start, you could do the same thing, but the non-moral facts by themselves, right? When I say the non-moral facts, I just mean what you normally think of as the facts. I'm just trying to stay neutral about this question that philosophers argue about whether there's some sense in which there are moral facts, that whether murder is wrong is a fact in some sense. And whatever complicated philosophical question, I'm just bracketing that, right? That you can't go from the non-moral facts straight to this is what we should do, because there's always has to be some should in the background, right? There has to be some basic goal that you care about, and that's not to say that you can't also argue about which goals you should care about, but the way that you argue, in my view, right? Maybe I've just mainlined too much, human Rawls, thinking about Andy's question in the chat, I think that much appreciated. Thank you for the super chat, Stephen. Stephen Dunn in super chat says a drop in the bucket for Dr. Ben's Lagavulin Fund. Appreciate that. Do not have any Lagavulin right now. The Talisker that I'm having right now, and some Ardbeg and some Nika, which is a Japanese whiskey. Friend of the show, Eric Kelly, sent me some of that, but no Lagavulin. Haven't had it in a little while, actually. Might get some of that soon. But in any case, right, we could argue about which goals we should care about, but the way to argue about which goals we should care about is by pointing out that there's some more fundamental goal that you care about that conflicts with some goal you think you care about, right? Or maybe when we phrase it in terms of goals, the thought isn't clear, right? So I think you absolutely can argue about values. Look, I've taught one of the classes I've taught every semester, more or less, right? Almost every semester, for a lot of years at this point, since I was in grad school, no, I guess not in grad school, but whatever, has been intro to ethics, right? So obviously, spent a lot of my time in my life telling people how to trying to give people the tools to argue about values. But I think that when you argue about values, what you're doing is the only way to make an argument with somebody about values is to appeal to some sort of underlying shared values. I know there are approaches that try to break out of that. I'm very, very, very skeptical about the idea that that makes any sense. I think that whatever the right conclusion is about metaethics, which is just the branch of ethics where you're concerned with trying to figure out, okay, what are we doing when we make moral statements? Is there some sense in which moral statements can be true or false? Blah, 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 right? Whatever the right fleshed out technical theory of that is. I think it has to start from that sort of basic understanding that there's really the only way to sort of come to a normative conclusion is to have some kind of normative premise in the background that you can appeal, that you can argue about value judgments on the basis of more fundamental value judgments, but not, I think, on the basis of anything else. Spinoza Logos, thank you so much for the super chat. The philosopher kings of today are challenged on what grounds, neoliberal or neoconservative? Not 100% sure what you mean by that, unless that's kind of a way of talking about what I was just saying about centrism and the like fact value jumps. But I think, look, I mean, most people who are actually have like academic training in philosophy, with which is like, if nothing else, that's like years and years and years of getting really good at taking apart arguments and taking them back together again. So anybody who does have that training could like give the little spiel that I just gave about why. Well, I was talking about it in the context of talking about Hillary, Obama kind of centrist, but that would double as an explanation of why Sam Harris's, there is no fact value distinction, you can derive morality from science bullshit is so silly. But most people who have that training don't use it for that purpose because either they have, they're, well, increasingly just adjuncts, right? Like, something like, I don't remember the exact figure, but something like 80% of people who teach at, colleges and universities in the United States are not tenure stream faculty. They're either adjuncts, right? The academic equivalent of Uber drivers, or they have some sort of like renewable full-time, but not tenure track contracts. And in either case, right, whether you're like driving around between 3 different campuses, trying to patch together some, approximation of something like a full-time income, and, use, buying like the shittiest Obamacare healthcare plan, or whether you have like one of those like full-time renewable jobs that, that don't have like where the teaching load isn't designed to give you any time to write anything, right? Then it's very hard to come up with, time to write anything academic or popular. And if you have, if you are one of the lucky few with tenure track jobs, I never have been, right? Then you wouldn't want to write stuff about like why Sam Harris is bullshit, because what you'd want to write is stuff in specialized academic journals that only a handful of academics read, because that's what you're institutionally incentivized to do. A tenure committee would consider writing, why Sam Harris's bullshit book to be a waste of time. That that would be taking you away from serious academic writing, which is pretty bad. So I think that's why more professionally trained philosophers don't do this kind of work. I think they should, but I think it's a structural problem. Let's see. Never really answered the Carnap question or the ethics question, but somebody mentioned in the chat, Anna Kasparian is going to be on GTAA this weekend. That's correct. The other guest is going to be Professor Walter Block, who some people may recall arguing with Sam Cedar in the past. So that should be an interesting discussion. Somebody asked in the chat, what does crime and punishment look like in a world without free will? It's a fun one. I'm going to get to that, but first I want to go back to the ones that I didn't answer from earlier. One of those is about Carnap, right? So yeah, Carnap and Bertrand Russell, both like key figures in early analytic philosophy, are both socialists. Quine, by the way, who I was a huge fan of in grad school, but I think was kind of right wing. But Carnap was a socialist, as was Russell. Russell's a non-Marxist socialist, and I think probably the same is true of Carnap. Oh, and Otto Neurath, who's a little bit more of a deep cut, but I think anybody who's ever taken an epistemology class will know who that is. He Neurath's boat, right, which is a metaphor people use for coherentism. That guy was a huge socialist. There's stuff about him in People's Republic of Walmart. He was really involved in the calculation problem debates about what it would take, about whether and how it would be possible to have a fully planned non-market economy. So appreciate that, Spinoza Logos. Yeah, Schlick, right? Yep. Yeah, actually, an idle thought. I mean, I'm probably not going to happen, or if it does, it's going to be many years. But I've had a thought someday about writing a book about like all of the socialists involved in early analytic philosophy. Yeah, I think Quine might have actually read over Anarchy, State, and Utopia, which is Nozick's libertarianism book. Oh, wow. Okay, cool. Ekin Erkan says Graham Priest is their advisor and also has amazing politics. Yeah, I've actually had that sense, right? So Graham Priest is a philosopher who writes about logical paradoxes and argues for this really unusual position. It's kind of a fringe position that sometimes when you have these cases, like when I say what I am saying right now is not true, all right, is that true or false? Well, if it's true, it's not true. If it's not true, it is true. What do you make of that, right? So there's this fringe position called dialetheism, which is most associated with Priest. There are other people who advocate it, J.C. Beale, several others, but Priest is like the leading historical advocate of this view. And I've actually, I don't share it at all. In fact, my dissertation was devoted in big part to arguing against it. This is, and I have a academic monograph, a book that I've been working on for a very long time called Logic Without Gaps or Gluts, How to Solve the Paradoxes Without Sacrificing Classical Logic. That's devoted to arguing against this and against other views, that are sort of parallel to it. Yeah, exactly, right? Somebody in chat says this sentence is true, the above sentence is false. Same deal, right? So anyway, I really disagree with Graham's views on this stuff, but that has always been funny. There are hints scattered throughout some of his books that he does actually have really good politics. Like he says. He has this good line in his book In Contradiction where he talks about how certain like semantic or set theory concepts, if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it, that might have been intended for these consistent purposes, but just because something's a human invention doesn't mean that it continues to serve human purposes. And he says, this is actually one of the best lines I've ever read in an analytic philosophy book. This is the lesson of Frankenstein, and in a darker way of Marx's Capital. So anyway, yeah, I think only ever met the guy a couple times, when he's come to various universities I've been at. But I think politically, philosophically, we have some big disagreements, but I think politically, me and Graham Priest will get along very well. Hartree Field, who's another person in that debate, another one of the big figures, I think. Might actually, I don't want to say this with any certainty, right? He was actually he was on my committee for my dissertation committee as like the external member, but we never really talked about this stuff. But I get the sense probably is not as good politically, maybe, right? I think he actually did support like the grad student unionization effort at NYU, so maybe I take that back. I'm mostly trying to like read the tea leaves of a joke that he made in a footnote once about the Beatles song about if you go around carrying Chairman pictures of Chairman Mao, ain't nobody going to want to get with you anyhow. Which not that I'm a Maoist or anything, but if you really like that line, that probably says something about your attitude towards radical politics. Yeah, Sean Carroll. That's an interesting idea. Yeah. Anyway, Carnap though, right? So big thing for Carnap. He has this paper called Empiricism, Semantics, and Ontology, and lots of other places he talks about it too. But that's the classic. Carnap talks about how there are um, there are a lot of traditional philosophical problems that Carnap thinks are ultimately just verbal disputes. They're a matter of people essentially talking past each other because they're operating with different conceptual frameworks. So once that's clarified, they're not really disagreeing about the substance. They're disagreeing about which conceptual framework to use to talk about the substance. Was Carnap really on the Tonight Show, or is that a joke? I honestly can't tell. Appreciate that, Paul. That means a lot to me, actually. Okay. I'm going to try to remember to get back to the fetus question, but I think the Carnap thing, I think is helpful actually for thinking about some political questions, or like think about trans rights, right? Recognizing people's gender identity even when it diverges from biological sex. That oftentimes, like the argument that people with socially conservative anti-trans views really want to have is an argument about definitions, or what's like, oh, but science tells us that biological sex is a thing, which I've always been willing to concede. I've always thought that was the wrong place to fight them on as far as the premises of the argument. But the question is, does it actually follow from this? Of course, one possible conceptual framework, probably the one that most people apply in most settings, is that like the sort of simplest theory of gender is that gender just is biological sex. That as like the sort of turfy people say, woman equals, adult human female, whatever. And of course, that is one internally consistent way of using those terms, of like arranging those concepts, but it's not the only internally consistent way of arranging those concepts. You could also have ways of using terms like man, woman, gender, that are about gender identity or gender presentation, and those are also completely internally consistent ways to talk. And science certainly can't tell you which way to talk. So to me, I think that like there are probably certain like specific settings in which the other one makes sense. But I've always liked Sophie Grace Chappelle as a trans woman who's a philosophy professor. I don't remember where off the top of my head, but she has a nice argument comparing that I reference and give them an argument to book, comparing yeah, G.A. Cohen is very funny. So she has a nice argument comparing it to parenthood. Of course, there is one way of using terms like mother, father, and parent that has a biological definition, but there's also a non-biological sense of parenthood that we use when we talk about like adoptive parents. In that case, it's like a legal category, or maybe a social fact, or just a fact about someone's relationship, to a child. And of course, there's some contexts in which when we use terms like mother, father, parent, we're using them in the biological sense, like the test came back and you're not the father. But the people. But then there are lots of contexts in which we use it in the other sense, and I think there's no problem saying the same thing. Maybe there's some contexts having to do with health, for example, where it makes more sense to use the biological sex definition of gender. But in most contexts, since these are both internally consistent ways of talking, those are both internally consistent ways of arranging your concepts. This is the sort of progressive Carnapian insight, I think. Then at that point, it's mostly a normative question. It's a moral question, about how to treat people. That is it like, should we talk in a way that recognizes the dignity and humanity of people who have, gender identities that, might diverge from biological sex, or should we talk in a way that doesn't? That seems designed, in fact, to deny their dignity and humanity. And I think in most contexts, that's a very easy call. And I think, that in fact, you could really extend the Sophie Grace Chappelle thing, because you could imagine the equivalent of like, the anti-trans bathroom laws and all that stuff, which would be having like, if this were a hot button culture war issue, whether to recognize adoptive parents as parents, you could imagine there being like some bigoted school principal who said that adoptive parents couldn't participate in parent-teacher conferences because parent has a biological meaning, God damn it, right? And we would think that person was a strange bigot, and that would be a correct thing to think. And I think that, I think the analogy is obvious there. I think that, look, I'm not going to, the whole debate about is turf a slur or whatever, right? I think that if you're somebody who thinks that the adult human female definition of woman, adult human male definition of man are the only definitions that are ever appropriate to use, that you should go around misgendering people, that trans women should be sent to male prisons, which is a recipe for predictable, brutal results, then you're somebody I very profoundly disagree with, even if you have some sort of theoretical explanation of those views that ties in radical feminism. As far as whether using the acronym as a slur or whatever, I mean, that's just not a debate that I have the slightest appetite for getting into. I don't think adoption per se is a taboo in Korea. I think really it's more that the past issues with often unscrupulous forms of international adoption. I think that's more the issue, right? So in any case, so there was the ethics question. The ethics question was about like moral theory, like utilitarianism, Kantianism, all that stuff. And I guess, this could be a very disappointing answer, because I know it's a little lame and fuzzy. I think that there's something very right, certainly when we think about like interpersonal ethics or really even political philosophy. There's something very right about saying, about like what Kant is getting at, certainly in the second formulation of the categorical imperative. That's the don't treat other people as merely as means in themselves. Sorry, I completely messed that up. Don't treat other people merely as means to an end, right? Instead, treat them as ends to themselves. Or, Kant would even say, don't treat yourself. His wording is always treat humanity, whether in the person of yourself or another, as an end in itself and never merely as a means to an end. In other words, don't reduce human beings to the level of mere means to an end. I think there's something very right about that. In fact, I might even extend that to, non-human animals, frankly, or at least some of them. But I think, the reason I was saying I wasn't going to get deep into that debate is just that what I have to say about it is what I already said, right? I don't have some deeper perspective to offer. I think that if somebody like makes a big obnoxious point on insisting on, the biological definition as the only definition to ever use, then they, he and I, or she and I guess, if they're, if they're really radical feminist, have a very deep disagreement. And I kind of laid out earlier all the reasons for that. As far as the nitty gritty of the debate, that's just, that's the beginning and end of really what I have to say about the topic. But in any case, please do that, Bisquick. Send me a Twitter DM maybe. So look, I think that there's something very right about at least that strand of Kant. Obviously, I'm not a like deontological fanatic like Kant is, thinks that like if there's a the Nazi knocks on the door and says, "Where are the Jews?" that you have to tell them the truth because lying violates the categorical imperative. But I think you could still say that there's like a real moral insight in at least that formulation of the categorical imperative. And it's one that could even help us explain things like why worker ownership of the means of production is better than like regular capitalist businesses, that you're not using people to make a profit. You're not reducing them to mere means to the end of your making the profit. You're giving them a voice and a vote like everybody else. But I also, wouldn't go with pure Kantianism. I mean, I think like ultimately you like really pin me down. I think something more like W.D. Ross's view, according to which there are lots of different prima facie obligations that, which are really, that's the way Ross put it, that we have these at first glance obligations, duties of justice, duties of repair, duties of rescue, all of these different duties. And then of course they can come into conflict, and then we just kind of have to make judgment calls weighing which one's more important in any setting. A lot of subsequent moral philosophers have thought that like a more precise way of putting what Ross was getting at was to talk about pro tanto reasons, meaning like all else being equal, reasons to do something or reasons not to do something. And I think that that's probably, that might be the best we can say for interpersonal ethics. I think when it comes to, political philosophy, I'm more sympathetic to John Rawls's idea that we should, that we need to have some sort of lexical ordering principle, which is just a way of saying, thanks, Roy, which is just a way of saying that, that we need to have some sort of principle to decide when different principles come into conflict, right? How to adjudicate those, because we're talking about actual laws that like people would be arrested for breaking. And so you can't leave that vague. We need to have a good, a good principle, for deciding how to rank things. But I don't know if that really answers the question or not. I hope it does. Yeah, and I actually do think, I know G.A. Cohen, who's my favorite analytic philosopher by far, has some criticisms of Rawls, but I think that especially late Rawls, when he has this like thin little book called Justice is Fairness, a Restatement, where he actually does come very close to completely adopting socialism. He maybe thinks that there is a way of carrying out his theory of justice without going all the way to socialism, but there's very little space between there and socialism. He basically says that if you have a society that's divided into a working class and a capitalist class, that's unjust, on his theory, and that seems right to me. The question that I skipped earlier was about fetuses. It'll be John Rawls, not Lou Rawls. That's interesting about Ned Block. I didn't know that. We live in a society, huh? The question was about whether I think fetuses are like morally relevantly similar to unconscious people who've already been born. And I think no, although it's a really interesting challenge to my view on this, which is that, as a literally mindless organism, a fetus isn't the right kind of thing to have moral rights. And so then you say, okay, well, what about like just regular people who've already been born who may temporarily become mindless for one reason or another, right? That they're, in a coma or something. And I think clearly it would be crazy to say that people in comas don't have moral rights. But I think that there's a distinction between already having that status, right? I think we need to make a distinction between having a mind that temporarily ceases to function and literally not even being a creature with a mind yet. Because after all, if you get into saying, well, even if something is potentially a person, it has all the rights that a person has, then like, okay, like why do individual sperm egg pairs that haven't yet come into contact yet have moral rights? Because that could become a person. And it's not obvious, right? We talked about this a little bit last week, I think. Hides his eyes. So I'm going to make this super quick. So I don't want to be too repetitive, but The question was, Ben, what does Kant think it means to treat yourself as a human being and an end in yourself rather than a means to an end? Like, isn't yourself the end in either case? Well, Kant would say that like that somebody who commits suicide is treating themselves as a mere means to an end because they're not seeing their own existence as having importance in its own right. They're just sort of, I'm willing to throw away my existence as a means to the end of ending my suffering. Obviously, I don't agree with that. I think that, I think that it is morally legitimate, I think, suicide is certainly a tragedy in most cases, although it might be the best, like assisted suicide might be the best thing for people with certain kinds of terminal illnesses who are undergoing severe and incurable, who are undergoing severe pain, have no realistic hope of a cure, etc. But that would be an example. Yeah, Kant has lots of crazy views, right? If you like Kant, if you think there's some insightful core there, you need to do a lot of work to separate out the insightful core from the batshit crazy stuff that he sometimes said while he's applying it, right? Like the anti-masturbation views or the views about like the like really like horrifying, he was writing at the end of the 18th century views about like the relationship between masters and servants or men and women, right? Lots of bad shit in Kant, no doubt about it, but also lots of really interesting insights. Yeah, right. I think the Numina stuff. Well, look, Erica, you said you're studying with Graham Priest, so I'm sure you've read Beyond the Limits of Thought, and the even if I don't necessarily like Priest's conclusion, the point that he's making there about Numina is certainly right. I mean, it's not original to him, but it's very well put there, right? That it's very hard to. I don't think Kant had a huge influence on like day-to-day politics in like Prussia, but I think he did have certainly he had a massive long-term philosophical influence. What's my take on Friedrich Engels? 4. I like him. Yeah, it's funny to imagine Dave Rubin talking about Kant's high-level ideas. Sorry, what was I? Totally lost my thread there. Yeah, he was a weird guy. Well, actually, the aliens thing is interesting. A surprising number of late 18th century thinkers took at least the possibility of life on other planets very seriously. So, for example, my boy David Hume, in his dialogues concerning natural religion, there's a point where one of the characters in the dialogue says, well, of course, we think that if there's some sort of ultimate cause of the universe, that it would be like a rational agent that's like, creating things using its intentions. But that's just because we are rational agents and we create things using intentions. So we read that into the universe as a whole. But he says, look, what if there's a planet full of sentient spiders, as there very, very well may be? Which I remember when I got to that, I was like, oh, wow, really? And, they would probably think that there was a cosmic spider that was like spinning worlds. So anyway, really weird, did not expect Hume to go there necessarily. But as there ought to be, yeah. So, yeah, I know Edward Bernstein was really interested in Kant. I'm actually had an idea for a while. I don't know if, again, I don't know if I'm ever going to do this. If I do, it's like 3 books down the line. Yeah, I really want to like go back and reread a lot of those debates with the early German socialists, Bernstein versus Luxemburg versus Kautsky. I've read some of that stuff, but it's been a very long time ago. I think it'd be interesting to go back to it, maybe even write a book for Zero about it. But yeah, I think that yeah, well, I mean, all I can say is, that seems very counterintuitive to me that people in comas wouldn't have rights. But anti-natalism, yeah, I disagree. Right, this came up during my debate with Kay Fellows about abortion rights, and I think I explained the point badly then, but I do think the point holds up. So anti-natalism is the view that it's morally wrong to have children because it's morally wrong to cause suffering, basically. And well, that's at least, I think, one of the main arguments for antinatalism. Antinatalism is just the view that it's wrong to have children, that there shouldn't be a next generation. And one reason for that might be to think it's wrong to do things that will cause suffering. There might also be ecological reasons for that or other reasons. But I find myself underwhelmed by the whole thing. I think that, certainly, I think that the sort of Malthusian idea that like the real problem with the environment is there are too many people, I think that's just wrong. I'm with my buddy Lee Phillips on stuff like that. Like, I think that eco-austerity is bad news, that in fact the solutions to most of our environmental problems are more and better technology. And as far as the idea that it's wrong to cause, like to bring somebody into the world knowing that they'll suffer, that could just as well be an argument for suicide, that you shouldn't continue to live in the world because you're going to suffer. And I guess you could say, yeah, but like the baby isn't consenting, to be born. But I find myself very unpersuaded by that. I think that, look, whether you're deciding to bring somebody into existence without consent or deciding not to bring somebody into existence who would have liked hypothetically to be in existence, either way, I think consent just doesn't meaningfully apply to that situation. I think that, I think, sure, of course, that you're bringing somebody into the world, they're going to suffer, but they're also going to enjoy, they're also going to have joy and meaning and, satisfaction and fulfillment and all that good stuff. If at some point they decide that it's not worth it, I guess that's up to them. But I think that I do, whatever. I mean, at the risk of sounding cheesy here, I think life is worth it. So I'm anti-natalist. I'm pro-natalist. You should, go have kids. Appreciate that, Leslie. Obviously not telling anybody who doesn't want to have kids, but if you want kids, go for it. Right. Any interesting example of communities that you like from around the world? Well, I think it depends what you mean. I think that, I'm very skeptical about the, hey, send me some magic mushrooms in the mail and I'll take them and get back to you. No comment on whether I might have done anything of that nature in the past, but in any case, yeah, communities around the world. That was the question. Yeah, I think. Well, look, it depends what you mean. Obviously, I'm very bullish about worker cooperatives. Something I talk about. Yeah, probably actually would not be a good idea to eat mushrooms that somebody sent me in the mail. All joking aside. But yeah, I've heard that about the Michael Pollan book. I had a good friend of mine read that and got really into it, but I haven't actually read it myself. Look, adoption is good too, but also, if you want your own kids, do that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Yeah. So, obviously, I talk a lot about worker cooperatives. I think it's really important to demonstrate in practice the fact that we don't need bosses, right? You might need some people to have management positions for coordinating roles, but you don't need, like unelected, bosses. You don't need owners that workers can run things for themselves. And I think it's important to demonstrate. And I think it would be, useful to have more of them. Obviously, Mondragon in Spain is a great real life example. I know there are critiques of it, but I think that even with all the critiques, it still seems to be an overwhelmingly good thing to me. It seems to make a lot of people's lives a lot better. And again, it's proof in concept for the concept that economic democracy is possible. But this is what I was talking to Greg Belvedere, the clip that went up last night. that's about like doing like crowdfunding to have like failing businesses to buy them up to reorganize them as cooperatives, because it'd be really useful if you didn't have to be like, okay, well, there's this cooperative federation in the Basque region of Spain, and most people you're talking about probably don't even know what that is. If you could say, oh yeah, there's that like store like down at the corner, that's a worker cooperative. That's clearly possible to run things this way. And I think Rojava, I think there's some good stuff there as far as cooperatives and stuff. There's a region of Italy that that Richard Wolff always talks about. Yeah, the Matt Brunig view of socialism. I like a lot of Matt's writing a lot. I think that basically, that's not ambitious enough. I don't think we can have like, capital F, capital C, full communism anytime soon necessarily, but I think Matt's idea of socialism is not ambitious enough. So just to be clear, Matt Brunig talks about having like basically the government buy up a bunch of stock until you have like public ownership of like most of the means of production. And I'm sure that would be better than what we have. It would eliminate some of the bad incentives in existing corporate capitalism, but in a lot of ways, it seems like it wouldn't be that different from existing corporate capitalism. And having that big separation, between like you'd still have that big separation between the people who actually work there, or even really local communities, and ownership, and certainly management, because ownership would be completely separated from management. And certainly like businesses that aren't incorporated, I guess, would still just be regular capitalist businesses. I think it's much better to really emphasize a combination of a more traditional kind of nationalization, although I think there's lots of room to combine that with increased worker autonomy at the workplace level, and whatever kind of private sector you still need to have it be have worker-owned firms, or maybe even worker-owned firms operating publicly owned capital goods. I think we should have like a slightly more ambitious version of socialism in mind, because I just worry that just having public stock ownership wouldn't do very much to overcome most of the aspects of capitalism that we want to get away from, and we should want to get away from. All right, going to get off in just a minute. Going to make dinner. I've been accused of whenever I say it's my turn to make dinner here, that it's always burgers. It's not burgers. Going to do chicken jambalaya and pumpkin pie. So I do know how to do more than just make burgers. But I'll take a couple of quick questions before I go. Super chats obviously go to the front of the line. Let's see. Sorry, I missed the question there. Let's see. Who do you think Republicans embrace going forward? Stick with Trump as a government and exile figure, go with fake populists like Josh Hawley, Nikki Haley, Tom Cotton, someone else? Look, I don't think they're going to stick with Trump. I mean, I might be wrong about this, but I have a very specific guess about what Trump is going to do going forward, which is to say this, right? All right. Touche, Thomas. So yeah, look, I don't think Trump's going to run again. I also, by the way, I know I disagree with some of you beautiful people about this. I also don't think that he's going to find some one neat trick to stay in office. I don't think any of the state legislature alternate elector scenarios, I don't think any of that shit is actually going to happen. I certainly don't think President Bone Spurs is going to, find the balls to do a military coup. I think that, he's going to grumble. He's never going to concede. There is going to be some president exile shtick, I'm quite sure. Or, maybe he won't. I don't know if he's going to go as far as doing like a alternative cosplay inauguration in Mar-a-Lago, but he's certainly but he certainly could say, oh, I actually won that election. It was tremendous. I won by a lot. He's going to be saying that shit for years, and he's going to say that he's going to run again. Last poor Yorick, thank you so much for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Guest suggestion: Taimur Rahman, Pakistani communist and professor and rock star, good comrade and interesting guy. Also Ashley Frowley. Oh, yeah, those are actually both interesting ideas. Ashley, I think, is almost certainly going to happen at some point, but going to look up the Professor Rahman. That's cool. So I think that Trump is going to leave. I don't think he's going to take it to the point of being dragged out by the Secret Service. And then I think he's going to spend the next few years saying that he's going to run for president. I think he's going to raise a lot of money by saying he's going to run for president. I think he's going to make it very hard for other Republicans who run, because he said he's going to say he's going to run, because of course, I mean, this is what Trump would do, right? He's going to grab the spotlight and rake in fundraising money for as long as he possibly can. But then I think when it comes time to actually pull the trigger, he's not going to do it. That's my guess. So we'll see, but who knows? I don't think New York's going to bring charges on him. I'm certain that the Biden Justice Department is not going to bring charges on him. That's just not going to happen. I would be shocked if that happened. New York, it's not out of the question, but if I had to put money down, I'd say no. Just on general principle that holding former presidents accountable for their crimes, whether in or out of office, is just not something we do in this country. Yeah, I wouldn't even be shocked, frankly, if Biden pulls a Gerald Ford and gives him a pardon. He probably won't even need to, right? I mean, he'll just do the informal version of that, like Obama did for all of the monsters and torturers in the Bush administration. Yeah, exactly. The fun of it is going to be that he's going to want to keep people guessing, right? Is he going to run? Is he not going to run? Yeah. So as far as when Trump doesn't run, who the Republicans put up instead, I don't know. I don't think Tucker Carlson is impossible. I think Tom Cotton has already maybe even laid some groundwork for a possible run. Josh Hawley's not impossible. We won't necessarily get another Trump-style right-wing pseudo-populist again. I mean, I know it seems like it right now, but these things are weird. They go in cycles. It's possible that next time we'll get a more mainstream Republican. Yeah, of course. I mean, I agree with Vosh about that much. I would love to see Trump dragged kicking and screaming from the White House by the Secret Service. That would be amazing. They could do that on pay-per-view and I would pay. But I don't. I just don't think it's going to happen. Right? Like I think he'll just come up with some excuse to leave quietly, even though I don't think he'll ever actually say Biden won the election. So yeah, it's possible it's going to be some kind of Tucker, Cotton, Howley kind of figure. It's possible it'll just be a regular Republican. I don't know. Right? I think, yeah, Josh Howley is definitely a right populist, or really, after having read Thomas Frank's new book, I regret ever even calling those people right-wing populists. I think we should say right-wing pseudo-populist. Populist is a word that actually has a meaning historically. But yeah, Howley, Tucker, Cotton, these are right-wingers who posture as populists in the same way that Trump did in 2016. And I don't know if we're going to get one of them in 2024, but I do know this, and maybe I'll actually end on this point. By the way, I should plug real quick before I go some upcoming stuff. But before I do the plugs, I'll just say this, right? I don't know if we're going to get a Tucker Carlson, Josh Howley, Tom Cotton kind of pseudo-populist right-wing authoritarian next time, but I do know that if centrists keep on winning, Democratic primaries, and we keep on getting people like Biden and Harris on the Democratic side, then there absolutely will be another Trump, right? Maybe it'll even be Trump himself. Maybe I'm wrong about what I said earlier and he'll run again. I don't think so, but maybe, right? But maybe it'll be Tom Cobb. Maybe it'll be Josh Hawley. Who knows? We will get another one of these guys, and probably the next one's going to be more competent and more dangerous than Trump himself. Unfortunately, that much seems pretty obvious. As far as plugs, so I'm having a couple of the co-hosts from the Low Society podcast, Peter Coffin and Angie Speaks, on the stream tomorrow at 5 Eastern. And just bring it on to talk about whatever's going on. I invited them to do that a little while ago. And on Friday, I'm going to have friend of the show and frequent guest Danny Bessner back on the stream to talk about fascism. So that should be fun. And on Saturday, of course, there's no live stream because Saturday is when the show is recorded. Like I said earlier, that's going to be Anna Kasparian and Walter Block. And yes, Low Society is very funny. There's a wonderful bit that they did when people were getting mad at Bernie Sanders for touting the endorsement of Joe Rogan. There's like a cold open like skit that they did on Low Society where they were making fun of people being mad about the Rogan endorsement. That I did. I remember back in what was that? February. I think it was February. It was the weekend of the Brooklyn live show for TMBS. I was crashing on Michael's couch that weekend, and like when I first walked into his apartment, I played him that clip, and he just laughed his ass off like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. There's going to be more Sopranos. That's going to be a monthly thing. We're going to do episode 2 in December. It's going to take a long, long, long time to get through the series, but it should be a lot of fun along the way. Appreciate that, Stephen. Exactly. They're fine with Bloomberg, but not Rogan. They're fine with Rick Snyder, who's the governor who poisoned the water in Flint. Who, in any sane society, he would be getting some sort of equivalent of a Nuremberg trial. So like you're fine with him, but like the comedian who has a podcast and has some good takes and some bad takes, that crosses the line for you. But whatever. So Peter Coffin and Angie Speaks are going to be on the stream tomorrow. Bessner is going to be on the stream to talk about fascism on Friday. No live stream, of course, on Saturday. Because that's when the show records, Anna Kasparian and Walter Block. And on Sunday, I believe gonna get Russ man, I like the guy. I've met him in person. I feel really bad that I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I'm going to get him to say it for me a couple times. But he has some great Zizek stories. So we're going to talk a little Zizek on Sunday. And on Tuesday, gonna have Derek Varn on the stream. So that should be fun too. So on Wednesday next week, just going to do another solo midweek live stream like this one, answer chat questions. Thursday, of course, nothing because it's Thanksgiving and I'm not sure after that. But anyway, sure. I'd love to have Cenk on. I'd be happy to talk to him sometime. So anyway, appreciate you guys always for coming on, keeping me company, asking chat questions, super chats, all that stuff. Really appreciate it as always. See you guys tomorrow for the Peter Coffin and Angie Speaks live stream. Left is best.